It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, digging into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is Dr. Michael Brown, and we're going to be doing a bit of a double header, talking about two books today. We're going to be covering his new book, Resurrection, investigating a rabbi from Brooklyn, a preacher from Galilee, and an event that changed the world. And we're also going to be talking about his new Job commentary, and that is called Job, the Faith to Challenge God. Michael, it's always a pleasure, sir. Welcome back to the show.
Yeah, great to be talking with you, Shaun. I keep writing books so we can keep doing interviews.
It's a perfect match. I love it. Michael, in terms of the circles I run in, everybody knows who you are, but inevitably there are some listeners who have not encountered you before. So for the folks who are encountering you for the first time in our talk today, give us that elevator pitch version of the Michael Brown origin story.
Yes, born in New York City, 1955, raised in a fairly nominal Jewish home, started doing drugs at the age of 14, playing drums in a rock band, radically saved at the age of 16 in 1971. My dad said, "Michael, it's great you're off drugs, but we're Jews. We don't believe this." That led to me dialoguing with local rabbis, which led to me studying Hebrew in college and ultimately getting a PhD in Semitic languages from New York University. So debating, dialoguing with rabbis, reaching out to the Jewish people has been part of my life for the last 50 years almost. And then doing serious biblical scholarship, so commentaries and lecturing at seminaries, that's been a part of my life. But because I got radically, wonderfully saved, encountered the Lord, my heart's burned for revival, for renewal, to see the church ablaze. With that, my heart's burned for the nation. So I've been overseas a couple hundred times ministering the gospel. And our ministry really has three main emphases, all with the letter R. So revival in the church, that's a great passion. Revolution in society, meaning a gospel-based moral and cultural revolution as Jesus changes us and we change the world around us. And redemption in Israel, seeing the Jewish people saved. So we've given ourselves to that in many different ways for many years now, in writing and teaching and preaching, in debate, in dialogue, in traveling ministry. I do a daily radio show, The Line of Fire, daily talk radio show 5 days a week for over 12 years now, and host shows on different Christian TV networks, and write really about 5 articles a week, op-ed pieces dealing with what's happening in the world around us. So we stay active and busy. And as we're doing this interview now, recording it in the midst of the shutdown and the lockdown and so much upheaval, it's pretty much life as normal for me in terms of here we are seeking to get a message out in writing and through the internet and serve the body and touch the world.
Yeah, it is interesting. For me, I work at home, so life feels fairly normal, at least in that regard. I am excited to see at the number of books that come out of this season, because there are so many authors who have downtime that they would not normally have in this season. And so I know there are a lot of people feverishly writing behind the scenes. We're actually recording this interview on Good Friday, so it seems appropriate that we start with your book titled Resurrection. So let's dive into the story behind that book. I'd love to hear a little bit about what inspired you to write about potential messiahs in Jewish history, and I'm going to try not to butcher this, particularly the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Did I do it right?
You nailed it, man. You nailed it. So here's the deal. When I came to faith and began to dialogue with rabbis, they challenged me on the Messianic prophecies. They challenged me on the New Testament quoting the Old Testament. They challenged me on why I wasn't living as a traditional Jew. But they didn't talk a lot about the resurrection. It just wasn't something we discussed. And obviously they didn't believe in it, but it wasn't something they challenged me on. So over the years, as I began to develop answers to questions, ended up writing 5 volumes on answering Jewish objections to Jesus, I dealt with the most common questions, objections that came my way. And resurrection was not one of the major ones. Plus, I felt that there were top Christian scholars that had addressed this from every angle. So they had already done the work. Let me do the work that hadn't been done. And what happened was a couple of years back, I was sitting with 2 young Messianic Jewish men, college age, grad school age. They're very active in apologetics and outreach to our community. And they were talking about the resurrection and arguments from a Jewish perspective. And it struck me, I need to write on this. It's such a central theme of our faith. I should say something about this as well. And then God gripped me very intensely and gave me a mandate to write this book, Resurrection. And here's what really prompted it. There was a famous rabbi known as the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Lubavitcher being the particular Hasidic or ultra-Orthodox group that he led. And Rebbe is just the name they give to the grand rabbi of their community. So right now there are a number of esteemed rabbis on the earth that are called Rebbe. So this was the Rebbe of the Lubavitcher movement. And he built this movement up from an obscure Eastern European movement that was mainly ingrown to an outreach movement to the Jewish world that is probably the most influential Jewish movement on the earth today, traditional Jewish movement. And as he got older, his followers began to wonder, could he be the Messiah? His teaching constantly emphasized the nearness of the Messiah. And in Jewish tradition, there's a belief that in every generation, there could be a potential Messiah waiting to be revealed if the circumstances will be right and the people of Israel will truly turn to God. So as he got older, they began to wonder, could he be the Messiah? And then he had 2 serious strokes, became very ill, was unable to communicate, and they became even more convinced he's about to be revealed as the Messiah. And then he died, June of 94. And of course, it was a crushing blow because they were so sure he was the Messiah. They were so devoted to him. He had sent out missionaries, emissaries around the world to reach Jews, and the movement was growing, and surely he's the Messiah. Now he's dead. And they began to say, well, he's going to rise, or his death was just a test for our eyes. Well, that was 94. That was over 25 years ago. But I had read yet another biography about the Rebbe right at this time. And with the 25th anniversary of his death, there was a lot of talk about him. And if you go to Israel or you go to parts of Brooklyn, you'll see big signs, banners with his picture proclaiming him to this day as the Messiah. And I was struck by the fact, wait a second, we can use this as a modern day test case to contrast the stories of his death and life beyond the grave with that of Jesus. And that's what got me going on this. And I realized I could write this book from a new angle, from an angle that had not yet been touched on. And it could be a very powerful argument, especially to reach Jewish people. So I haven't opened up what the argument is, but that's how I got to write this. But it was unusual the way I received an intense burden and a sense of mandate. You must get this out, and it will reach the Jewish community.
You have a chapter in the book titled, Why Not Judaism for Jews and Christianity for Gentiles? And as I look back on the years of having theological discussions, I've had conversations with people who ask that question, well, why don't we just let the Jews do their thing and we'll have all the Gentile folks do their thing? From your perspective, why is it important that Jesus was a Jew? Why was that necessary?
Yes, well, excuse me. If he had merely come as a prophet to the nations, as a Jew, came and said, I have a word for the nations, worship the one true God, the God of Israel, well, that would have been one thing. Or if he himself had been a Gentile, and as a Gentile, gotten the revelation that there was one true God and told the whole world, worship the God of Israel, that would have been one thing. But every strand of the New Testament proclaims him as the Jewish Messiah. Every strand of the New Testament says that he's the one that fulfills what was written in Moses and the prophets. Every strand of the New Testament says that he did what he did to fulfill what was written. So either it's true or it's not. Either he died for the sins of Israel and the world, and he rose from the dead, and that is the truth for Jew and Gentile alike, or it's not true. He didn't die for our sins. He didn't rise from the dead. He didn't fulfill Old Testament prophecy, and therefore he's not the Savior or the Messiah of anyone. Put another way, Jesus is the Savior of the world because he's the Messiah of Israel. If he's not the Messiah of Israel, he's the Savior of no one. So this idea, well, Judaism is for the Jews and Christianity is for the Gentiles, it doesn't work because Jesus came as a Jew first for his own people. He came first and foremost for the lost sheep of the house of Israel and then for the whole world. So if he's not Israel's Messiah, then the whole world should pay no attention to him. If he is Israel's Messiah, then the Jewish people must pay attention to him. This is an option that we don't have, Judaism for Jews and Christianity for Gentiles. It is not a possible option.
Well, in terms of the resurrection, I'd love to have you comment some on why is that one of the most important, if not the most important event in all of world history. I feel like in the church, we hear about the resurrection at Easter time, but it can be one of those things we don't reflect on a lot or really explore, feel the depths of why it's so important. So why is that so critical for Christians to understand?
It's everything. It is really everything. Obviously, his resurrection presupposes his death. So when we speak of his resurrection, we speak of his death and his resurrection. So we believe this man dies on the cross to pay for the sins of the world. This Jewish carpenter crucified by the Romans is saving the whole world. It can seem utterly preposterous on the one hand, but he rose from the dead, never to die again, in the presence of multiple witnesses. They saw him after his resurrection, and not just one or two, but up to 500, and over a period of weeks. Nothing like this ever recorded, no claims like this ever recorded for anyone else who ever died before. And if he's risen, then everything he said is true. If he's risen, then he's coming again. If he's risen, then we can 100% put our trust in him to save us. That's all I need to know. And it's a constant reality to me, Shaun. It's something I live with 24/7. It's what gives me confidence in the face of any storm, all opposition. Well, he's risen. It's done. It's that foundational. And you see, here's what's fascinating, a major theme that I open up in my new book, Resurrection. Scholars, skeptics, psychologists, sociologists, others, they said, listen, here's the reality. The disciples experienced cognitive dissonance. They went into a state of denial. They were so sure Jesus was the Messiah. When he died, it completely crushed them. And it was so crushing that they couldn't handle it. And instead, they went into denial to the point that they literally believed that they saw him rise from the dead. Now, on a psychological viewpoint, that's been disputed, that things like this just don't happen with mass hallucinations of resurrection. But I realized I could now argue this from another point. You see, because the disciples in the New Testament were not expecting Jesus to die. He kept saying it, but they couldn't get it. He said he's going to die and rise. They couldn't wrap their minds around it. They thought he's going to die, it's all over. When he dies, that's it. And so they're depressed, they're fearful. When they first hear reports about his resurrection, they don't believe it. When the women come, no, it can't be. They're skeptical. It rocks their world. It shocks them that he rises. Whereas the followers of the Rebbe were waiting for him to rise. They were expecting him to rise. They had vigils outside of his grave waiting for him to rise. And to this day, even though many of his closest followers still claim that he's the Messiah, to this day, none of them claim that they physically saw him alive after death, because death is very stubborn. Not only so, they deny the reality of his death. They'll say, well, his death was a test for our physical eyes. Well, if you look on their calendars, they don't even have this day when he died in June. They don't even have it on their calendar, recognizing his death, because they have to deny it. And then ultimately, because he didn't rise, the movement moved on without that. And the official proclamation of the major rabbis of the movement today is that we don't believe he's the Messiah. We believe we could have been, but he wasn't the Messiah. So interestingly, they had to change their narrative because he didn't rise. So we have a modern day test case, and we can contrast it with the reality of the resurrection of the Messiah to the shock of his disciples. The fact that he's risen, that's all I need to know. Everything else will fall into place.
Michael, in terms of the reader's overall journey with this book, when they get to the last page of Resurrection, what's that key message, that key concept you hope every single reader hears loud and clear?
I believe a light's going to go on where faith is strength. Yes, it's true. Even though we often know things are true, we don't feel the full weight of it, the full reality of it, the full power of it. I believe with this, there'll be this overwhelming, even deepening sense of joy and excitement. Yes, He is risen. I believe it's going to be a great faith builder.
Amen. Well, that's a hopeful thing to hear on Good Friday. Thank you so much for that. So that wraps up our conversation about resurrection. Now we're going to transition over to Michael's brand new Job commentary. Now, in terms of academic books, especially commentaries, I know that's usually a different, much longer journey if we're going to contrast that with the average straight book. So would love to just hear about like what was the length of time invested in this Job commentary to get it to market? It must have been a bit of a journey.
Yes. If you want to give the full scope of it, it's about a 10-year period. And you are very right about academic books. I wrote a commentary on Jeremiah, Shaun, and it was part of a series. And because my book, my commentary was like 550 pages, but it was coming out along with a couple of other books. So it was going to be one volume over 900 pages. From the time I finished the commentary to the time it was published was 5 years because I had to wait for the others to get their work done. So, and then academic work, the editing is tedious and it's just a whole different process. Now, I had been fascinated by the book of Job my whole believing life. It's just so much about it. It's like, what? Just couldn't understand it and found myself digging deeper into it. And then teaching in Bible college and seminary, I would often do classes on the book of Job. But it so happened as a little over 10 years ago, I was teaching again a class on Job at a local seminary. So it was students from bachelor's degree up to PhD. We had great discussions. It was a wonderful class on Job. And I got so excited about it. I got almost obsessed. I've got to write a commentary on Job. Now, I had been accumulating a large library of Job commentaries and books over the years. But I said, I've got to dig in deeper. I've got to write a whole commentary on Job. So I began to contact different publishers, and they said, oh, we'd love for you to do it, but we have a series coming out, a commentary series, but we've already assigned the commentary on Job. Yes, same with another publisher. Oh, we'd love to have you do it, but the Job commentary is already assigned. So I reached out to Hendrickson publishers, and I said, hey, how do you feel about a standalone commentary? In other words, it won't be part of a series. It'll be a standalone commentary. They were interested in it. I began to work on it, but then got waylaid with other projects. Different things came up, and I didn't think the time frame was really that tight. So I was kind of working on it in the background. And they said, hey, when are you getting this in? I thought, okay, I better work on this more. So I worked on it day and night. And then one of the editors said it would be great if you did a translation of Job, a new translation to include. Well, it's the hardest book of the Bible to translate by far, in my view. So wrestled with that and months working on the translation. And then I submitted the volume, and there were two editors with Hendrickson I was working with, both PhDs from Harvard University. And they said, listen, Michael, it's great, but there's a problem. You wrote for two different audiences at the same time. This is for scholars, and this is for the general audience. You kind of mixed it together. You got to choose one. So I thought, okay, I need to reach more people. I want to reach more people. So I did a rewrite, had to now go through the whole book and rewrite things so that it would be more accessible for a general audience. And then it was finished. And then from there, about a year process of editing before it was published. And, you know, academic works like this, they don't sell a whole lot. You know, they don't sell lots of books. And you don't write this to make money. I could have made more money looking for pennies on the street and finding them over a period of years, you know, per hour of work on this. So the amazing thing is when the book was published, this just come out recently, the first printing, like 1,500 copies, they thought would last for 3 years. It sold out within a couple of months. So that was a good sign that people were interested in it and appreciating it.
Well, as a guy who worked in the academic space early on in my publishing career, if you can move 1,500 volumes of commentary in just a few months, that is quite impressive. So clearly you struck a chord with at least 1,500 people who wanted to read your new book. In terms of Job, you know, I think he's a character we read about in the Old Testament. Folks don't always know what to do with him. Is he a real person? Is this maybe more of an allegorical story? So in terms of Job, from your perspective, is he a real life person that we're reading about?
Absolutely a real life person. The Bible presents that as such, and it's essential that he is a real life person. Now, there's been debate even among the ancient rabbis as to whether Job was just a parable or whether he was a real person, whether the book was a parable or he was a real person. Number one, the account is painted as if it's all real. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the Old Testament, the book of Ezekiel, mentions Job by name. And then in the New Testament, James in the 5th chapter mentions Job by name, as both as examples of righteousness and perseverance. So the Bible identifies him as a real person. And then everything that we learn from Job becomes almost meaningless if he is just a literary creation, if he's just fiction. You know, if you read an inspiring story of a mother of 4 whose husband had died and she was fighting cancer and courageously fought through and raised her kids and now she's ministering to cancer survivors. It's an incredibly inspiring story. Then you find out at the end it's all fiction. Well, you could make anybody do anything in fiction. You know, where's the reality of this? So that's what's so moving, that this is real life. Job was one of us.
One of the parts of Job I think a lot of us are very familiar with is the section where we get some insight into what's going on in the court of heaven. We're seeing more about that interaction between the seen and the unseen realm. In terms of how that informs our worldview, how should that be impacting us?
Right. Well, Job doesn't see it. Job is not aware of it. But it tells us that there are often things going on behind the scenes that we know nothing of that bring radically surprising different results in this world. And what we have to do is determine that our faith in who God is going to be unmoved and unchanged. That we have to realize that sometimes inexplicable things happen to God's people. We don't want to make the mistake of the friends and say, well, Job, you must be some wicked man, because things like this don't happen to godly people. We don't want to judge the sufferer, but then we don't want to do what Job did and judge God and say, well, God, there must be something wrong with you because I don't deserve this to happen. So the friends wrongly judged Job. They didn't know what was happening behind the scenes. And Job wrongly judged God because he didn't know what was happening behind the scenes. Whereas ultimately, God had a larger purpose, and he was going to bring good out of evil. He was going to bring grace out of suffering. He was going to do something greater in the end. But there will be these seasons where it just doesn't make sense. Perhaps there's more going on behind the scenes that we're not aware of. Don't change your view of God.
And in terms of Job and his journey with suffering, I feel like this is a book that a lot of Christians turn to process how to deal with suffering and tragedy in their life. Is this a good place to go for guidance on how to deal with suffering effectively?
Yes, it is in many ways. First, it tells you that some people that love the Lord go through hellish seasons in this world. You're not alone. A second thing is to realize that people will often misjudge you and look at you wrongly. That's happened before, and God's saying, don't let that hang over you. But another thing is that Job is raw and honest and real. And that was one of the goals in my commentary and in the many special essays that I have in the back of the commentary, to try to get the raw power, the reality, the intensity of that message across. So that you have to realize when you're going through hard times, you might be tempted to think evil of God or to rail on God. Well, Job did. Now, on the one hand, God rebukes Job very strongly for speaking ignorantly and for painting a wrong picture of God. But in a fascinating verse at the end of the book, in the 42nd chapter, God expresses anger with the friends who did not speak rightly about God, as God says, my servant Job did. Job spoke rightly about God. You think, what? He just got rebuked, and now God commends him for speaking rightly. How can that be? That leads to the subtitle of my book, The Faith to Challenge God, that Job had enough faith in the goodness of God that when it seemed God was acting contrary to his character, he felt he had to challenge him. he felt that he had to hold God to being God. And in that sense, he spoke rightly about God, because God is not a destroyer of innocent people, because there is justice in God's universe. So on the one hand, when you're going through hard times, yeah, you may lash out, you may get upset. God understands that. It's not helpful, but God understands that. And there it is in the book of Job. On the other hand, it's right to say, God, you're good. And I know that you're good. And I can't believe that you would do these kinds of things. There's something right about that. With Job, we flee from God to God. It's a great act of faith.
Well, another thing I'd love to get your feedback on, Michael, is kind of the experience over the course of writing the commentary. Were there any discoveries or surprises that challenged you? I'm sure there were some unexpected things you found along this 10-year journey.
Yes, just so many insights that arose. One thing I realized was the narrow orthodoxy of the Friends. They had a very stiff view of things. If you're righteous, God blesses you. If you're wicked, God curses you. And there was no nuance to it. Maybe you'll suffer a little as a righteous person because God's chastising you, but that was as far as they could go. And often we have this stiff orthodoxy because we can't let our views be challenged. In other words, if you're a person of faith and something bad happens to you, now this undermines my life. Well, does that mean something bad will happen to me? So my safety valve is, well, I'm just going to write you off. So I understood even more the dangers of holding to a too rigid orthodoxy. The dynamic of Job's faith, I had known that, but that became even more real. Why even his wrong accusations came out of a heart of faith, and this aspect of the faith to challenge God. I learned a lot in terms of the end of the book. Leviathan and Behemoth is this hippopotamus, crocodile, Behemoth and Leviathan. How do we understand these things? What was God after in his speeches at the end? Those were real eye-openers for me, because, you study the text, you teach on the text, and you have lots of different views. Someone says this, someone says this. Here's the view of different commentators. You discuss it with your students. But then when you're writing a commentary, you need to do your best to come to conclusions. So those just were a few of many, many eye-opening things as I went through the book.
Well, if I put on the lens or hat of some of my academic friends, I know a lot of them, in terms of considering a new commentary, they're always curious, what's the unique contribution this new volume is going to make to the discussion? So if you contrast your Job commentary with other popular Job commentaries, what's special, or what's the secret sauce that you're bringing to the table?
Yes, I would say several things. One, I'm writing as a Messianic Jew, so I'm drawing on Jewish scholarship and Christian scholarship. Many will get either or. So I'm drawing on both, and they often approach things differently. So that's fascinating. That's one thing. Second, I wrote with all the scholarly apparatus, with all the scholarly background, with all the philological tools and things like that, but packaged things so that anyone could read it. So it's not a popular commentary in the sense of just I went preaching through the book of Job and its inspirational sermons, but rather with all of the scholarly rigor, put this together, but then presented it in a way that anyone interested could read it. So it combines those elements. And I think another element is that I really try to convey the spirituality and the raw faith and emotion of Job. And then I conclude with a series of special essays that are very, very practical. What would Job say to a godly sufferer? Challenging God as an act of faith. How did Job and Jesus compare? Who was Hasatan, the adversary, Satan in the book of Job? The dangers of holding to a too rigid orthodoxy that I mentioned. Special essays on the Leviathan and Behemoth and so on. So the special essays at the back, I think, add to this as well. So I believe it's unique in a number of different ways, and the responses we got from scholars, theologians, professors seem to verify that the book did strike a chord by God's grace.
And Michael, you are working all across the web. You're doing video shows, you're doing audio shows. You've got tons of articles coming out every week. So, in terms of where we can connect with you and stay in touch with what you're doing, where are some of the places we can find you on the web?
Best place is my website, askdrbrown.org, askdrbrown.org. And you can connect with me there, read my articles, normally 4 or 5 a week, the daily radio show, new videos that we put out, other links to other activities. And then if you're active on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, you can connect with us there. You can follow us. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. So this way, the moment something's happening, you'll know about it. And I encourage everyone that as soon as you go to the website, sign up to get our emails, and you'll get a free mini book, 7 Secrets of the Real Messiah, an ebook when you sign up. So go to the website, askdrbrown.org, and get on our email list.
And like we do with every episode, we'll have detailed links in the show notes, places where you can connect with Dr. Brown and pick up your own copy of both of these great new books. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Dr. Michael Brown. Once again, our books today were Resurrection, Investigating a Rabbi from Brooklyn, A Preacher from Galilee, and an Event that Changed the World, and his brand new commentary, Job, the Faith to Challenge God. Again, for more on Michael and his excellent books and resources, a great place to start is his website. You can find that over at askdrbrown.org. And Michael, I just want to say thanks for sharing with us today. It's always an honor and a pleasure to have you join us on the show.
Always be great to be with you. Thanks, Shaun.